Nothing's more critical in our life than the matter of life and death. Most of our deepest fears and taboos are rooted to it after all. Sadly, life is unpredictable, and death and farewell can come unexpected and unprepared. So it is only human that we wish for one last chance to reach out to our beloved ones and say one last goodbye and tell them how much we love them. In some rare cases, that wish seems to be granted, as in today's collection of stories. This is actually the second episode about the last goodbye from the dead. If you missed it, the link's in the description and at the corner of the screen. But this episode includes particularly more heart-wrenching accounts about the lasting love that goes beyond life and death. Prepare a tissue or two. So, here are 6 allegedly true stories about the last goodbye from the dead. As always, handpicked, translated and narrated by a host, Anthony. It's from when I was little. I may forget what I did yesterday, but this from 20 years ago is still clearly etched in my memory. At the time, my family lived in a small rented side building, sharing the courtyard with a landlord who lived in the main building across. The landlord's family was a friendly bunch, except for the patriarch, the landlord himself. He ran a construction business and had a pretty rough mannerisms from the tough business background. He would never just pass on me and my brother whenever he saw us, either give us a good long lecture or play a naughty prank on us. I don't think he meant any ill. Nevertheless, it often made us feel uncomfortable, especially should we run into him when he was drunk. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night, needing to pee. The toilet was in a separate building, and it was always a hassle to use it at night. It was a rainy night too, so I just opted to pee towards the yard from the veranda. Oh, but a bad luck. Right in the middle, the landlord came back home late, and our eyes met. I cringed how he should scold me or make fun of me for catching me peeing to the yard. But to my surprise, he just looked at me silently and went into his mother's room, followed by the sound of his sobbing from inside. I never saw a grown-up man crying, and I stood there listening, alerted. Soon I saw the landlord coming out. Then he looked around the house and went out again. Next morning, I sensed something had happened. There was sound of crying and laments from the landlord's family, and my parents too looked so grave that I didn't even dare to ask what happened. Only when I came back from school that afternoon, Mom told me that I should be respectful and keep quiet for the next few days, because the landlord passed away. She didn't tell me any detail of how he died, but I told her I saw him the previous night. Mom's face went stiff, because the landlord had an accident in the afternoon shortly after lunch. He apparently drank too much with his lunch and fell into a hole and died early in the evening. After the funeral, Mom passed on my story to the landlord's mother, and the old lady burst into tears, saying, "My son came to say last goodbye, and I just slept through. My poor boy." I guess I was too young and foolish to understand the significance of my experience. and indeed didn't think anything was amiss, even though landlord that night looked totally dry, even in that pouring rain. Two years ago, I and my bestie was in the last year of middle school. Bestie's mother was gravely ill with pancreatic cancer. She was a strong lady, and I remember whenever I paid a visit to her in the hospital, she never showed a sign of her weakness or pain. Unfortunately, misfortune came by the pair, as they say, and the business of Bestie's dad also ran into a hard time. His mother didn't want her family wasting money on her treatment and insisted to spend the rest of her life at home. Our teacher gave her permission to my bestie to stay home if he needed to nurse his mother, but his mother wouldn't let her son go slack with his study and made sure he attended his classes. As to please his mom in the best way he could, Bestie focused really hard during classes and then rushed back home to tend his mother as soon as the school finished. I think I was the only one who knew his agonizing heart waiting for the inevitable. I can't even count how many times he cried in my arms. One day in October, Bestie didn't come to school in the morning. When I called him, he informed his mom lost consciousness at 8 previous evening and passed away in the hospital in the early hours of the morning. I went to see our teacher to pass on the news and organize a group visit to the funeral. The teacher didn't seem to believe me at first.
"It couldn't be,"
he said.
"I called his mother and talked with her last night, I think about 9 or 10. When I told her how well her son has been doing at school and had a great result from the recent test, she sounded very happy. No, it was definitely her."
But that was impossible. By 9 previous night, Bestie's mother would have been in hospital, unconscious and dying. After the funeral, I visited Bestie to help with cleaning up his mother's things. Among them was her phone, and it showed a record of one unanswered call at 10 the night she passed away, and it was from our teacher. There was no other record of call or message from the day otherwise. Who can tell what really happened? But my friend, and I too, want to believe his mom must have been happy to hear the positive report about her son before she went. I have a very close friend from childhood. He's the oldest of the siblings with 3 younger sisters, and this story is about his second sister, whom I'll call Young-hee for the sake of the story. 8-9 years ago, Young-hee had a car accident and passed away. We were all in shock. Young-hee was barely 20, and we all liked the pretty and good-natured girl. At the funeral, I heard the youngest sister saying with tears, "Last night, Young-hee woke me up saying that we should visit Mom, and I just shut her down that I'd rather sleep more." Young-hee had the accident the previous night, and that might have been her spirit making a last visit before passing away. It was not something unheard of, and I took it as more touching than surprising. But then a few months later, Youngie's bestie paid a visit to her mother out of blue with a bouquet of flowers and a cake. Youngie's mom welcomed her in and asked what brought her there.
You see, last night, Youngie came in my dream and told me that today is your birthday and she should like me to visit you on her behalf,
Youngie's friend said. It was indeed the mother's birthday. The friend actually didn't know the exact address nor Youngie's mom's phone number and had to ask around to find a way. Even in death, Youngie remained a good girl as she always had been. It's not a scary story, but it's nevertheless unforgettable for me. My dad passed away when I was 13, and my mom raised me alone. I can't say I was a very good son for her. 14th November last year, I came back home late from work, emptied a can of beer and went to bed. Then I had a dream. My mom appeared, her face wet with streaming down tears. "What's wrong?" I asked. But she didn't say anything. What woke me up was the ring of my mobile. It was a nurse from the hospital my mom was staying. My mom just passed away. I rushed to the hospital, but by then, Mom was already cold. It wasn't solely unexpected. She'd been staying in hospital for 6 months by then, unconscious after a massive brain hemorrhage. But facing her untimely death was still more devastating than I ever expected. During the 3-day funeral, I asked more than a few times to see her stored in the morgue and cried over her cold body. A few days after the funeral, I had a drink with some friends after work and was on my way home. Suddenly my heart bursted with longing for my mom. It was 6 in the evening, and winter evening got already totally dark, but I just headed to the mountain where Mom's ashes was scattered. There lied my dad, and ashes of my older brother, and now my mom. What was there to fear when 3 of my dearest people were lying there? I emptied 3 bottles of soju, crying, talking to them, and crying more. And then I think I dozed off, drunk. Then I felt somebody's hand caressing my face. It was soft and warm. I opened my eyes, and there was my mom, rubbing my face and looking down on me with eyes full of sympathy. I wanted to call out, "Mom!" but what came out was a burst of crying.
"My boy, you should go home. You can't sleep here in the cold. You too don't want to go a long way, do you?"
said Mom, and urged me to get up. But I was so drunk, I couldn't even stand up. My car was about 500 meters down the mountain, and with my spinning head, I couldn't dare to take the way.
"I'll come with you. Now, hold my hand,"
Mom said, holding my hand. And strangely I felt lighter. I was still unsteady, but I felt like I was walking on the cloud, light and dreamy. And all the while, Mom's presence was so real. The warmth of her hand and her smell. When we reached my car, I couldn't hold my pee, so found a bush nearby to take a leak. When I turned back, Mom wasn't there anymore. I looked around, searching for her, but she wasn't there. Leaning against my car, I took a cigarette. Even in death, Mom was caring for me. Why didn't I do better and be a better son for her when I had a chance? Tears poured down once again. My mom is from a family of local dignitary of a sort. Her father was not only wealthy, but well known for his wisdom and generosity, that villagers often came around to seek his advice or help. For such a reputation, her family strictly kept all the formal traditions when it came to various family events, such as memorial rituals, funeral, weddings, birthdays, etc. And the story goes back to when my mom was a teenage girl. Her grandmother passed away, and her family, as it used to be the tradition, held the funeral at home with her body in the coffin behind the shrine. Mom was a gentle, tender girl, and for the duration of 3-day funeral, she often sneaked behind the screen and cried over her grandma's coffin. That day too, she put her head over the coffin and was shedding tears. "경자." Mom clearly heard Grandma's voice calling her name from inside the coffin. Mom ran out, crying out for her mom, and told adults of the family that she heard Grandma calling. They all ran to the coffin and stuck their ears to it, because they couldn't possibly open up already nailed coffin. But they couldn't hear anything. They just concluded that Grandma took a pity of her beloved granddaughter being so sad over her death and wanted to console her one last time. Anyway, time passed, and Mom got married and moved to Seoul. Because her hometown was away, she couldn't attend the Grandma's memorial rituals every year. But she usually never forgot to at least make a phone call to her older brother on the day. But one year, she happened to forget it completely. After the dinner, she sat in front of TV. Day was grey and it drizzled outside. Then something fluttered and tapped on the kitchen window. Mom turned to look at it, and a black bird flew off from the window sill. Mom opened the window and found the bird had left something there. A candle, the thick white kind that is typically used for the occasions like a memorial ritual. And it suddenly reminded Mom of what she had forgot, her grandma's memorial ritual. I mean, it all could have been a coincidence, but still uncanny. A story from my oldest aunt. She's a teacher, and her first post back in the early 70s was somewhere in a small town far away from her family home in Seoul. She had to find a cheap room in a boarding house. Most of her neighbors in the boarding house were young workers hired by the clothes sewing factory nearby. Korea was still very poor then, and many young girls found a similar type of work as soon as they graduated middle or high school. Aunt's next-door girl was such a case too, barely 18. She was pretty and friendly, and Aunt became friends with her quickly. Share food together, help each other's chores, spend day-offs cooking and chattering together, like close sisters. Then since when Aunt noticed the girl not so much available anymore, she got a boyfriend. The boy was a lower-ranking manager of her factory, a young man who just finished the military service. Not only handsome and mild-tempered, but the rumor went that he was a nephew of the factory owner. All in all, he was deemed as the prince in the factory, and he became the girl's boyfriend. Time was still conservative, and the girl had to face some bullies and gossips behind her back as her colleagues started to notice her relationship to the manager guy. Regardless, her love for the guy deepened, and she seemed to be quietly expecting him to propose to her in the near future. But one day, the manager guy didn't come to work. It was just explained that he went to a business trip. It was long before emails and mobile phones, so the girl just thought it must be some urgent business. But he didn't come back after a full week, and yet other colleagues or managers seemed avoiding to tell her where the guy went. It was by pure chance that she got to overhear what a couple of supply deliverers, chattering among themselves, that her man went to Seoul to get married to a woman from a good, rich family. The young girl's heart broke. How could he? If he wasn't serious, why did he even talk about their future together? How could he just disappear without a word and get married, just like that? Her colleagues told her to get over it. Why would a man like him settle down with a poor factory worker with no background? It was just her fever dream. I guess they were jealous of her relationship from the beginning and didn't intend to take her side. My aunt alone brought the girl porridge and tried to console the broken-hearted girl, but she spent a few days bedridden and hidden away from the world. Then one night, the girl woke Aunt up. It wasn't even dawn yet. Aunt found her all dressed up and carrying a travel bag.
"Where are you going?"
Aunt said.
I shall go. I don't want to see any of my colleagues or factory people, so I'm going before anybody wakes up, the girl said.
"But isn't it too early for a train or even a bus? Come, I'll make you breakfast. At least have it before you go,"
Aunt said, but the girl calmly shook her head.
Be well. Thank you for being my good old sister,
she said, and left. Aunt was sad to see her go, but had nothing much she could do for her. That evening, Aunt came back from school, and the boarding house was turned upside down. The girl was found dead in her room, hung. Aunt couldn't believe it and pushed her way to the girl's room. There were all her belongings packed away in a travel bag, just as she saw in the early morning, and the girl's body laid out, covered with a white sheet. The police interviewed Aunt if she didn't hear anything. Aunt told them that she woke her up early in the morning and said she was leaving. The police's expression changed.
"Did you say early in the morning? But the medical inspector seems to think the time of death was much earlier than that. at least in the early hours of the previous evening. Are you sure? You might have dreamt it,
he said. Aunt was about to burst out that she wasn't the kind of person to mix up a dream with reality. But then she remembered something. As the girl walked out of the room, in the pale blue darkness of the early hour outside, was a dark shadow figure seemingly waiting for the girl. Aunt didn't think much about it then, but the dark figure was probably a Grim Reaper. The girl indeed went away with a Reaper. Aunt couldn't say anything more, and just shed tears for the poor girl and her last goodbye. Hi, it's Anthony here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. Today's stories made me curious. Should you face death unexpectedly and are given a chance to say your last goodbye to one person only, who would be your choice? It is a tough question. I myself would still have to say my mother, who hasn't seen much of me since I left Korea. What is yours? If you enjoyed my work, please leave it a comment and click the thumbs up, and please consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't yet. If you are a fan of paranormal, supernatural, crime and disaster stories and want to hear the stories you've never heard from anywhere else, my channel is for you. If you'd support me more directly, I also have a Buy Me a Coffee account. Buy Me a Coffee supporters enjoy an early access to my new content. Or, if you prefer, you can also use the Super Thanks option right here on YouTube for a small donation. Thank you for all your support in whatever shape or form. I'll see you next Sunday. Stay safe and take care.